Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to another Cyber Threat Alliance webinar. I am Jason Cooper, the Chief Data Sharing Officer at Cyber Threat Alliance. Um, I'm joined today by some esteemed panelists. We're going to talk about the, sorry, the title of today's webinar is Cyber Operations and the Iran Conflict, Statecraft and the Digital Gray Zone. And we're really going to focus on three themes there, right? One is this idea of a digital gray zone where the players, the threat actors within the gray zone are often hard to attribute exactly where they lie. They're not necessarily state-backed. They might be quasi-state-backed or unofficially state-backed, and we'll talk about that. We'll return to what we talked about in our December webinar, Cybersecurity in a Fragmented World, that I hosted for back in December for Cyber Threat Alliance. Um, this is really kind of a part two on that. We talked about back then, more generally speaking, what was happening in sort of the gray zone world, and what could be done and what was being done to sort of combat that situation or at least defend against it. Um, so for this one, uh, let's talk a little bit about um, what we're going to do today. Um, Focusing on Iran. Iran runs one of the most active and most distinctive cyber programs in the world. They have really play in all areas, not just spying or intelligence, destruction, disruption, hack and leak, ransomware campaigns, partnerships and fronts through hacktivists and criminal crews, proxy personas, always looking for a layer of possible deniability. Of course, they're not the only country that does that, but that's the focus for today. And that's what I mean by the digital gray zone. And when it comes down to this, we're always being impacted on our infrastructure, the things we all use and share every single day, and what the impact of that could be. So for today, we're going to frame that in the context of the current conflict. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to introductions of the panelists. Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Acharya. I'm the threat intelligence operations lead for Talos's threat intelligence team. Um, my job is basically to make sure our customers are getting the actionable intel that they need at any given time. So I'm just kind of overseeing. We have 5 teams under our director and overseeing all of their different efforts and missions. Um, Specifically for the Iran conflict, we surged a small team to address our customers' questions and needs for that conflict, which is obviously still ongoing. Um, so, yeah, I'm hoping to share some of what we learned in that surge today.
Thanks, Caitlin. And Sar.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ansar. I am the Chief Information Security Officer and VP of Research in SOC Radar, which is a cyber threat intelligence platform. So yeah, I am basically responsible to protect the company, but at the same time, as a VP of Research, I'm very interested in as a security researcher to what is going on with the threat actors. As we talked before, maybe you were in the conversation. We need to be more predictive. Just telling this data is leaked. So that's why our research team heavily invests on being predictive, especially with the involvement of AI. And Iran and the Israeli conflict was one of them. There are very interesting things happening. That's why this webinar is so important. We have very interesting things to share with you. And thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And then Sean.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christian Beek. I'm the VP of Cyber Intelligence here at Rapid7. And what it means is like I'm leading several teams that do research into the dark web space, the underground, cyber criminals, nation state activities, of course, where we talk about today, right? And also working closely with different product teams where we provide the intelligence and the information that customers are asking around specifically this conflict, for example, but also to make sure that yeah, we were proactively hunting and also monitoring the signals and combining that all together. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Great. Well, let's get into it. Um, First, I want to talk a little bit about just the what's been going on with the current conflict, who the conflict actors are, and really the sort of, I guess, operational picture that we're looking at today. So let's start by maybe establishing the baseline. Who are the main Armenian cyber actors? What are they doing? How has this current conflict changed or accelerated their activity? And so, to each of you, what are the top one or two Armenian linked actors, or maybe more than one or two, your team is tracking most closely right now? What are they doing that's different from, 18 months ago, 6 months ago, or even the days leading up to February 28th? Caitlin, can we start with you?
Sure. Um, so we're looking at both the military, so IRGC and MOIS Intel services, running Intel services, and kind of looking at what the threat actors from those groups are doing. Handala hack being the major one, I think, right now for MOIS, and Cyber Avengers under IRGC. And they've matured a lot, I think, since they came onto the scene, like 4 years ago. I think it was like 2023 when they started popping up. And we've seen them kind of grow from these originally criminal, what we thought were criminal, just like hacktivist groups. And honestly, back then, weren't really giving a whole lot of credit to them or a lot of attention. And now we're seeing them using more advanced techniques against targets. And we had the Handala hack attack against Stryker, which caused maybe not destruction, but a lot of chaos and fear especially among healthcare customers. And um, yeah, that was probably one of the bigger uh, intelligence needs for our customers in that Iran war conflict recently. They're moving away from custom built malware, and they're moving towards those living off the land techniques where it's hard to distinguish who is in your network and are they legitimate or are they bad actors. And I mean, we see that a lot with Chinese actors these days, and we're starting to see them move into that level of maturity, which makes them a lot more difficult to defend against. Trying to think what else. They're blending into normal traffic, and they've matured a lot over the past few years. So that's made our jobs much harder as defenders. So we're certainly paying attention to them now because of that. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Um, Ensar, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I think to set the baseline correctly, what we are seeing in the current Iran-linked cyber activity is not completely new playbook, but a significant acceleration and expansion and already mature ecosystem. So Iran has always operated one of the most layered cyber programs globally. So they have a strong mix of state-directed groups, semi-official operators, and loosely affiliated activists or proxy actors. And what is different now is the level of coordination across these layers and how openly they're operating in the what we call the digital gray zone. And from our tracking, groups like Handala and similar aligned collectives are at the center of this current wave. But what is important is not just the group name itself, it is how they operate. So they combine the data leaks, psychological messaging, recruitment, and direct targeting of individuals into the single campaign. That is a shift. So 18 months ago, we would mostly see defacements, DDoS, or isolated breach claims. Now we are seeing multi-layer operations that are designed to influence both system and people at the same time. For example, we are seeing Telegram channels being used not just for announcements, but for operational coordination and narrative shaping. Messages like all nodes online or the mesh is live. So they are not technical indicators, they are psychological signals. They are designed to create a perception of scale and coordination, even when the underlying operations may be fragmented. And another major shift is direct targeting of individuals. We have seen campaigns where the actors claims access to U.S. personnel includes Marine Station in Bahrain and attempt to contact them directly via messaging platforms like WhatsApp. At the same time, we are seeing doxing campaigns where the federal employees or individuals tied to the government or defense ecosystem have their personal information exposed. So I was monitoring one of the pro-Russian channels, and they specifically share the photograph and the address, direct address on the Google Map, and the phone number of the U.S. federal employees. That's very scary. So this is no longer just cybercrime or espionage. This is intimidation and psychological pressure. And another interesting thing for me, the recruitment aspect is also new at the scale. So one of the Telegram bots we observed are actively asking users about their location, capabilities, access. They're actively crowdsourcing intelligence and potential operations support. And this is this bot created as long as they said what they did is Iranian intelligence. So that is a very different model compared to traditional nation state recruitment. And it fits perfectly into the gray zone because it blurs the line between the state directed operations and volunteer participation. And then on the data side, we continue to see high volume of breach claims across the forum and channels. Some are legitimate, some are recycled, and some are purely native driven. But in this conflict, the distinction matters less because the objective is influence. So a claim breach targeting a defense-related entity or a government contractor immediately becomes part of the information battlefield. And regardless of its technical validity, okay, sometimes they say this is old data or this is not used as data, but that's not important at this point because again, what they are trying to do is psychological warfare. To summarize, the actors we are tracking most closely are not just defined by their names, but their behavior. And they're operating in a hybrid model that combines cyber operations, psychological warfare, and narrative control. So compared to 6 or 12 months ago, the key differences are scale, coordination, and focus on human targets. And that's what makes the phase of the conflict particularly important to understand.
Oh, thanks, Ansar. Yeah, that's a lot to take in. Um, Christian, your thoughts and the Rapid Sevens thoughts.
Yeah, like, look, we're focusing on both on the sides that Caitlin and Ansar already highlighted, right? So you're looking at the nation state activities, the claims. We're looking, of course, also at um, the gray zone area, which has been mentioned a few times, right? Like, what are these actors doing, or where are they hiding behind? Of course, we saw some activities from the IRGC influence groups, right? So I think one cover-up operation we discovered recently, actually, in which we will release this week, a blog about is like, hey, they mimic themselves as being like a ransomware group. But as a matter of fact, it was not a ransomware group. It was really like an Iranian group that was actually conducting these operations. So there's a lot going on there, and I think even if you take a little step back, I think they learned a lot from a conflict which is already going on for a few years between the Ukraine and Russia, right? A lot of these operations, I think that whole conflict changed cyber and how you can actually weaponize cyber during a conflict. And you see those operations being mimicked and being taken, maybe sometimes even improved during this conflict. And I think what traditionally we as in the industry, and I'm talking, of course, with Katen and Sar, um, it's all about attribution, right? We have a lot of questions like, oh, who's behind this? But I think with all this blurring going on and with all these conflicts, it becomes less important, honestly. It's more like, hey, how to keep these guys out of the networks, how to keep uh, our companies, our customers secure. And I think that's why we have a focus a lot on like, hey, it's less around attribution. It's more like, hey, what are some of the tactics, techniques? what are some of the tools they are using, and can we predict or go somewhere or see like, hey, where are they stashing their tools, and can we actually already block a lot of the incoming actions on that? So that's a lot of where we look at as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in some ways because it doesn't matter who's attacking you. It's more about how can you defend against it, especially with all this complexity. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the critical infrastructure, um, OT, ICS portions of this. This one's been really interesting to me to look at. You go back a few years, we've really seen a steady, but I think, as Ensar pointed out, recently really accelerating uptick in Iran-aligned activity targeting OT, ICS infrastructure. Um, cyber vendors was mentioned in the last section. Right? There was the Unitronics campaign against U.S. water utilities back in 2023. Um, Fast forward a little bit. I mean, there's a lot in between all of this, but last summer, during the 12-day war, there was a what seemed to be a very coordinated, high volume campaign against Israeli infrastructure, um, which was of course conflict related and oriented. And now we're watching this unfold in the current conflict. The infrastructure we all rely on, which is a big theme of what I like to talk about here, is you know it's under attack, right? It's also at the same time being used to make the attacks. It's an interesting sort of uh, it's an interesting place to be where we all rely on these systems like utilities, energy, transportation. Let's say, today, maritime is certainly within that. Um, and I would say, data infrastructure, then I mean the physical part, um, has quietly become a battle zone, or maybe not so quietly anymore. So I want to dig into that a little bit. What have your teams observed? Uh, and what it means when adversaries are reaching into the physical systems that touch everyday life, where in some ways this becomes much more real to the average person. Christian, can you start us on this one?
Yeah, sure. So of course we saw, and that's really those telecom channels and all that stuff. People bragging about like attacking ICS OT systems in Israel, for example, sharing screenshots, and sometimes you have to really go back to like, oh, but this is fake, right? This is from the past. We know there are some warnings out there where we saw some PLC attacks happening towards the US. So if you talk about critical infrastructure from, I would say, a cyber angle, that's mostly where I would say like, oh, these are the typical senses showed in attacks where they try to find some systems, look up if there's a vulnerability and try to exploit it. That's kind of the sense we saw a lot happening. If you talk more the physical side, of course, we know that there were drone attacks on infrastructure in the Middle East, and that in some parts, some data centers were hit. And well, if you do business in the Middle East, a lot of the Middle East customers don't want to get the data out of the region. So it's in those data centers. So definitely some of us had impact while data centers were hit, and suddenly, some of the continuation or some of the data processing was actually paused or halted, or we had to defer to different directions, right? So I think this is one of the first conflicts where we really had these kind of, I would say, hybrid warfare impacts where, well, drones were hitting data centers and immediately impacting some of the services that a lot of the companies are providing to the Middle East. So I would say those are the two highlights. We observed a lot here from Rapid 7.
Caitlin, anything you want to add to this topic?
Yeah, just to kind of go back to how some of these hacktivist actors have really matured over the past few years, in these kind of gray zone conflicts. We're seeing them, like you mentioned, the Unitronics campaign. Those are fairly not non-complex systems that I believe the cyber vendors was targeting at the time. And now we've seen them in this conflict, targeting Rockwell Automation, which are much more complex and difficult to hack into. So there's a concern there around how much they've matured in their techniques and tactics and even if, to kind of touch on what Enzar and Christiana have said, to touch on that psychological warfare aspect, like this, even if they're not successful in exploiting or getting into these systems, it's creating fear. You know, we saw CISA put out a huge alert about targeting of these Rockwell automation systems a few weeks ago, and that's a big concern. I think at this point, like as this conflict continues, I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see that kind of targeting. Does not mean that they're successful in it, but the fact that they're trying in itself kind of gets people and customers spun up, which then creates more work for us defenders and takes our focus away from what we what could be going on, you know, on the other side of the conflict. So it is really just to kind of circle back to that whole psychological aspect. It's I think that's a big part of this gray zone aspect of things.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Starts to enter the psyche a little bit differently. Ensar, what do you think?
Yeah, great question. Great insights from Kathleen and Christian. So, what makes this infrastructure discussion even more critical is that we are no longer talking about hypothetical risks. We are seeing real-world examples where infrastructure, including cloud infrastructure, has become a direct target of conflict actors. So, for example, in the current conflict, Iranian operations have extended beyond traditional cyber activity into the physical and hybrid targeting of digital infrastructure. We have seen confirmed incidents where AWS data center in United Arab Emirates or Bahrain were struck, causing outrages across banking, logistic, and enterprise system in the region. And what this demonstrates very clearly is that the cloud is no longer abstract. So it is physical, it is addressable, it can be targeted like any other critical infrastructure. At the same time, the United Arab Emirates has become a major focal point in the conflict, not only from the kinetic perspective, but also from a cyber perspective. We are seeing a massive increase in cyber activity targeting government systems, financial services, and critical infrastructure, with attack volumes significantly increasing since the beginning of the conflict. So, in parallel, there are also been attempts to leverage AI-driven cyber operations against Middle Eastern countries, targeting digital infrastructure, showing that the advisories are actively experimenting with more automated and scalable attack models. I remember when they targeted the United Arab Emirates infrastructure, it was so sophisticated and advanced using the AI tools. The new terminology actually born, they call it military agentic AI. It is not something we already see in the battlefield. So, and this brings to us very important emerging concept, what we call again military agentic AI. We are entering a phase where AI is not just supporting cyber operations, but potentially as an autonomous or semi-autonomous operator within those operations. Research and early indicators suggest that AI-driven cyber agents can automate reconnaissance, targeting, exploitation, and even adaptive decision-making at the scale. That's what we saw with the attack to the digital infrastructure of United Arab Emirates. From threat perspective, this changes the equation significantly just because instead of human-operated campaign that unfolds over days, over weeks, you now have the potential of machine speed operations targeting cloud environments, critical infrastructure, and exposed systems simultaneously. And can you imagine, Jason, like even for the smartest people, it takes maybe seconds to make a decision, but for AI, it's milliseconds. So this cyber war is something again we never seen before. And so the key takeaway for me, at least, the infrastructure is no longer just a victim of cyber operations. It is becoming a battlefield itself. So cloud platforms, data centers, identity systems, and communications infrastructure are now strategic targets. And with the introduction of AI-driven offensive capabilities, the scale, speed, and unpredictability of these attacks are increasing. And from defense standpoint, this means organizations need to think beyond traditional boundaries. That's why when we have internal meeting with the CTA, If you remember, that's what I told CTA plays very critical and important role because the attackers already very organized and they share information, they are synchronized, and we need organizations like Cyber Threat Alliance to be much better prepared in the defensive part.
Yeah, that's all. It's so much to take in. Thanks for to all three of you for that. As we have these discussions, I always kind of start having thoughts in my head, like what's next, and we'll get to that. But you know, um, a lot has evolved over the last 5 years with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as was mentioned earlier, as sort of a new playbook for how to run conflict-oriented cyber operations. And now, literally in just that time, we're also now in the AI agentic period, and as Ensar pointed out, military agentic AI. Um, so it's a lot to take on, and it's moving really quickly. Um, let's talk a little bit about um, the actors and you know where the agenda of the state ends and the agendas of the various either ideological or criminal or just profit-focused entities begin. And increasingly, as was already mentioned, why it doesn't really matter so much anymore because it's so gray. It's hard to even really pinpoint all of it. Um, Defending, of course, is the key to all of it. So, back in December, we kept pulling on a thread um, of this gray zone. Looking to this discussion, groups like Handala, Cyber Avengers, there's others, Cyber Tufan, Moses Staff, and I don't want to isolate this just to Iranian focused threat actors because there's other players outside of the conflict realm, if you will, who are taking advantage or who are participating in it in various ways. Um, for example, we know that there are groups that have been hitting Iranian infrastructure as well, right? In the cyber sense, not just from the ballistic military sense. States avoid attribution by working with or through these sort of hacktivists, criminal crew, front personas, and those groups also act on their own. So, can we explore the convergence sort of state operations, state adjacent operations, quasi-state operations, and genuinely independent hacktivism and other groups, and what it really means for that attribution, response, and policy? We touched on this a little bit as well, but specifically um, going forward and how it's playing out during this conflict that erupted on February 28th. Um, Sorry, who did I not go first? Oh, Ensar. You're back up again.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sorry, folks.
So that's exactly the right question to ask because this is actually, we take our conversation shift from who is behind an operation to what the operation is trying to achieve. If we look at the evolution over the last 5 years, especially starting with the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, we saw the emergence of the very effective playbook. That playbook combined state capability with non-state amplification. So you had intelligence services, military cyber units, hacktivists, criminal groups, and information operations all operating in the parallel. What has changed now is that this model has become normalized and even more fragmented. So in Iran-linked ecosystem, this is very visible. You have groups that appear hacktivists on the surface, but they are aligned with the state narratives. You have criminal actors who are financially motivated, but they are opportunistically target entities that are politically relevant. You have proxy personas, Telegram channels, leak sites, and now automated system all contributing to the same operational picture. At some point, trying to draw a clean line between the state and non-state becomes less useful. So this is where the digital gray zone becomes operationally real. The state does not need to directly control every actor. It only needs to align if the narrative is aligned, if the targets are aligned, and if the timing is aligned. Then the effect is the same as coordinated campaign, even if the actors are loosely connected. So we are also seeing this amplified by AI and what we can describe as early stage agentic behavior. Automation is being used to scale reconnaissance, to generate phishing content, to translate and localize messaging, to monitor targets, and even to manage large volumes of interaction on platforms like Telegram. And when you combine that with the human actors, you create a hybrid model where operations can move at the machine speed but still adapt with the human intent. This is why attribution, while still important at strategic level, becomes less critical at the tactical level. So, from defender's perspective, this impact does not change whether the actor is fully state control, state aligned, or purely opportunistic. The same infrastructure can be targeted, the same data can be leaked, and the same individuals can be pressured. So the real shift is we are moving from attribution focused thinking to effect focused thinking. Instead of asking who is behind this, we need to ask like what is the objective, what is the impact, and what this fits into the broader campaign. And when you look at it through that lens, the agendas start to converge. A state actor wants the influence or disruption, a hacktivist wants the visibility or ideological impact, a criminal group wants the profit and attention. But in the gray zone, these objectives are overlapped. So a data leak can be generate profit, push a narrative, and create geopolitical pressure all at the same time. So my point is, where the state agenda ends and non-state agenda begins, is increasingly blurred. If you remember, Jason, before we had APT groups, when they're in your network, they want to stay in there forever. They don't want to go public, and their main motivation was not money, right? And then we have ransomware operators. Once they're in your network, they're gonna go to public immediately, and their main motivation is money. So there was a one clean line before, but what I see right now, that line is totally blurred. So that line is not that clear anymore because we can see state uh, supported APT groups doing ransomware attacks, ransomware groups supported by APT groups. So again, the most important thing to understand their motivation and their achievement.
Hey, Caitlin, your thoughts on this overall?
Yeah, I really like what you said, Enzar, about attribution being less necessary or less important than the effect of and the objective of these actors. Just to give kind of a real world example of this, you know, a month or so ago when we had Team PCP kind of uh, throwing out there this worm that was targeting Iran as the Iran war conflict had just started, and we've got all of a bunch of our analysts and researchers focused on Iran, but then we have this huge supply chain hack with Team PCP, but now they're also targeting Iran. Why are they doing this? So again, there's that they're drawing our focus away from what they're actually doing on the supply chain side and confusing us more as defenders. And then just at the same time, almost the same time, we had the Axios NPM hack, and we're all thinking this, it seems so similar to Team PCP. Is this another Team PCP hack? And for almost a day, we did think it was Team PCP. It turns out it wasn't. It was DPRK. Do the attributions really matter there? Not really, because the effects are much bigger than who was doing it, and probably all of that time that we and the industry kind of wasted on um, deliberating over who was doing it. It's another weight on defenders that we're going to have to figure out how to overcome. Um, as we also saw, I think Team PCP and probably the DPRK actors utilizing AI. So we're going to see more of that. That's going to continue to increase the grayness, I guess, of this gray zone conflict, because if we're able to identify that that as a technique being used, it's kind of an element that it's unknown. And that's scary to a lot of us. So we also on the defense side need to figure out how to use AI better ourselves in our defense, in our protections. So I think the gray zone is going to continue. It probably is going to get worse. It's going to get more gray, and we as defenders need to figure out ways to overcome that. And I think the CTA is a great, I know Ansar hit on this, but the CTA is a great alliance where we can share those techniques, and that's not something we need to keep kind of copywritten under our own organizations. That's stuff that needs to get shared and executed on at a wider level in this industry. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So we have 2 out of 3 so far forecasting gray skies before the sun breaks through. Um, Christian,
It's
what are your
bleak.
Christian, what are your thoughts?
And now I have to actually talk about the sun, right? No. Well, actually, I think one of the things we talk about is gray zones, right? But I think we talk about Iran on this webinar, but actually they were actually the ones that were really perfect and actually already having this gray zone present from the past, right? Um, when I was back in Saudi, we were handling the Shamoon event over there. We knew that a lot of the front companies or some forums or hackers between brackets were involved in the attacks, but actually they were directed from the Iranian government in conducting these attacks, right? So I would say by the time the blurred lines were not so blurred as they are now. But yeah, as defenders, as we all mentioned, we have some challenges ahead, right, which we need to fix. And I think, I mean, which I really like is like, look, at the end, the three of us are you as well, Jay. So we work for different companies, but with conflicts like this, we are united, right? Like we see that at some point, then the competitive hat is flowing away. I think then where the defenders come in and say like, hey, this is a major deal. We need to protect globally our society. And I think this is what I really like about these alliances, where then suddenly all that stuff flows away. We step up and we share this information because it's really for not for us, but it's also for the future, for our next generation, our kids and beyond, right? So that's not only I think, yeah, we're having this issue around the gray zones now. We have AI where everybody's talking about, but I think, yeah, the bigger question is here, like, hey, how can we actually keep up or at some point get ahead of the game, right? Like, I always feel sometimes we're fighting big fires and we don't have always enough water. But when actually are we getting ahead of the game and actually make it threat actors really difficult, right? So we can direct them in certain directions where we can control them. And I think that's a challenge I would love to pick up for, for the amount of years I'm in this business. But like, yeah, I would love to actually make those guys really difficult instead of that they are spoiling my weekends and evenings. So payback time.
Yeah, payback time. Okay, well, I think we're nearing the last few minutes of our webinar. Um, but I want to wrap up a little bit. I think we kind of did a little bit of that right there, but generally speaking, I like to go to sort of so what now? What should you expect to see coming? Obviously, you know, uh, agentic AI and the AI is going to be a central theme, and we've hit on that. Um, but I'm just wanting to get quick thoughts from each of you. Um, you know, what should we be expecting? And then also, I wanted to also encourage if you have any interesting, sort of examples or stories that you've seen throughout this conflict and the growth of this area in the last couple of years, feel free to share as well. I'm going to go back to Caitlin to finish off here first.
To wrap up, I think what we're going to continue to see, as I mentioned, is this gray zone continue. I think we're going to see more um, nation states playing in that area than they already are. Um, I think we're going to have to change the way we've been defending for the past decade or so. I think we need new techniques. We need some new techniques in how we defend and protect. So there's going to be, I kind of see a shift happening. I mean, we're seeing that with AI come onto the scene, but we've got to figure out how to utilize that ourselves as defenders, and not just for like, can this AI tool like write this report for me? Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually employing it or deploying it to work on solve some of these hard problems that we're coming across, this gray zone that we're in a lot of these conflicts. And organizationally, I think Christian had mentioned how the Russia-Ukraine war had kind of led us to figure out how to handle these kind of regional conflicts. And if you haven't already figured out in your own organization how to kind of spin up these surge teams, like it's gonna continue. You're gonna have to set up these kind of quick ops tempo teams that can address customer needs, the public needs, all of these questions that come up rapidly, very rapidly. Everything's happening faster and faster. So I hate to sound so bleak. Kind of the vibe though recently, unfortunately. But we're all like, this is we have some of the smartest people in this industry, and like I do have faith that we can figure things out. It takes time. So yeah.
Yeah, I like your pointing to the surge team readiness, and I kind of just to add to that thought, I also think that's also where collaboration comes into play so much. It's almost like we need to have industry surge teams, as these things kind of emerge or erupt. Um, Thanks, Caitlin.
hit,
Um,
Hit me up. It's my specialty. So if we
yeah,
need to come up with something for CTA, let me know.
well, we'll talk later.
I'm gonna get an email from Jason.
I'm like typing right now.
Yeah.
um, yeah. Ensar, what's your wrapping up thoughts?
So yeah, if I had to summarize what comes next, I would say we are moving into the phase where speed, scale, and psychological impact will define cyber operations more than technical sophistication alone. So the first thing is to expect the continued expansion of AI-driven operations, not necessarily a full autonomous system overnight, but increasing agentic workflows where parts of the attack chain are automated. And the second trend is deeper targeting of individuals, not just organizations. What we saw in this conflict with doxing, direct messaging campaigns, and recruitment attempts is going to become more common. And the third thing is continued expansion of what we define as critical infrastructure. It is no longer just power grids or water systems, cloud environments, data centers. Identity providers and communication platforms are now core infrastructure. And another key expectation is the normalization of the gray zone model. The mix of the state-aligned actors, hacktivists, and the criminal groups is not just temporary. And one example that really stands out for me from this conflict is how Telegram has evolved from communication platform into an operational platform. So we have seen channels coordinating narratives, bots recruiting participants, actors sharing allied breaches data, and real-time messaging being used to intimidate individuals. That level of openness combined with the scale is something we did not see at this level. And two things are very important, as Kathleen said. We need to use AI much better in defensive part, and as Christian mentioned, um, in this situation, we are not competitors. We are working for same achievement to protect to people. That was also very important. And what I believe, we, as Kathleen said, we have smartest people in defensive part, and two of them here today, and we need to listen to more. Okay.
And Christian.
Yeah, what to say now with all these beautiful words and sentences, but I think one of the angles we might have not touched a little bit upon today was actually about like there was such an amount of news coming out during the conflict, and such a kind of fear was actually created, right? And I think sometimes, and look, we Dutch people always say like, "Hey, we stay modest, right? Like we act when something is really happening." So with all the, I would say, even news we can't even sometimes verify, right? That's quite a challenge. So there's a lot of panic, fear being created. And I think that's something we need to be aware of. Like if you, I think, Caitlin, you mentioned the striker event with the healthcare customers. Like how many questions we didn't receive? Like, oh, do you guys have the wiper sample? Do you guys know how it works? And do you have YAR rules? I mean, just like, no, it was not a wiper, right? Like just filter through the information. They used their own tools against them, right? They had like a weak password when they came in. That's easy to fix, right? Fix your password policy, make sure you have multi-factor authentication. That was the easiest advice to give. And we didn't have to create detection rules for the wiper and stuff like that. And sometimes we're overhyping and sometimes we're getting excited about all the stuff and fears going on. But I think just let's take one step back and just like start to realize like, okay, what can we really anticipate? What is historically has happened, right? That's where you can prepare upon. And I think still, and I think I'm shouting this for 25 plus years in the industry, like your basic cyber hygiene is still important. If we still see people being popped by simple vulnerabilities that could have been patched 3 months ago, or like a very simple password on your outward facing VPN device, we still have some homework to do there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, um, thanks to all of you for joining me today. Um, really interesting conversation. I'm like you, Christian. I've been in this industry for 25 plus years. Um, we're still alive. Um, we're still going. And it always just fascinates you to see how all these things move. This specific set of scenarios that we've been talking through and the overall kind of movement of this gray zone are something I'm really fascinated with and think about a lot. Um, you know, we can sit here and prognosticate about how to move forward, but we don't have a lot of time for that today. So again, I just want to thank you for sharing what you've observed, sharing your thoughts. I learned a bunch of new things, and I thought I knew a lot about some of this stuff. So again, thanks so much. Um, we will see all of you at the next CTA webinar, which is actually, I think there's one next week. So stay tuned. And of course, you can always find these recordings um, on cyberthreatalliance.org and our YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone.